Yes, starting the English version of today's session. So not everything will work similarly here because we have things are in memory. We have the session already started and things like that. But we will see the same features as we just went through in the Finnish version. So today's topic technically is a person DAX magic command, but for whom and why it's worthwhile mentioning is that if you think about tabular model in your Fabric instance, and you are not perhaps the developer of it, but you are, for example, a consultant, or you are just arriving to the team, or kind of you could be a developer, but you have a certain set of queries which you use to validate the model. Kind of there are use cases where it's not only Power BI Desktop, which I would be using that, okay, I will create a table visualization and start tracking columns and measures here to try to investigate how the kind of model behaves. But I have like specific queries that I would like to run against the model. In Power BI Desktop, you have that new DAX query view, which would be here. Unfortunately, in a public version of Power BI Desktop, today it's not possible to use that view against live mode or live connection versions of the desktop. So kind of you would have to have the model imported in your desktop to be able to use that. So that's out of the scope. I still have a requirement to run queries. Then what I could use is that I could go to the workspace and workspace properties and find the workspace connection string and use my management studio, for example, to connect to the workspace and run my DAX statements or XMLA statements from here. So that could be like an option to do. So here I could easily evaluate and then summarize, hoping that it will not take forever to connect, please. Summarize columns, something, and take a measure and run the statement. But here I'm running that on my own environment. Kind of these are like a set of queries that I would need to check whether this model works or kind of, let's take the currency name and sales, and I think I had a measure called sales here. Yes, like this. This would be a very easy query to query the model. But for some reason, this is one of the queries we use to validate the model that we have data in it, or the data looks good. And where should I save these queries? Probably in a text file and put them in a Git or something like that. And that's not like, yeah, it's doable, and those are the workarounds that have been used over the time. But now it's actually possible to have Fabric notebook, which by default is like Spark notebook, of course, but we don't have to be a PySpark developer. In the semantic link, which is a PySpark library, if and when we install that to our session and load an extension called Senpai, it enables us a new functionality where we can use person DAX and name of the model. And then we can just run DAX as we would do in Management Studio or anywhere else. And this is technically connecting via the same XMLA endpoint to the model. So there was before this recording, there was a question that how big of the model is and kind of how it behaves. And yes, it makes sense when you think about it. Is 1 second query like fast or slow? But on the other hand, this will be equally slow or fast when doing those queries as the Power BI Desktop or Management Studio or any other querying tool would be, because this is not like loading raw data to Spark and then analyzing on top of that. This is using the DAX or XMLA endpoint of the tabular engine doing those things. In the SemPy and semantic link libraries, there are other functionalities which are visible through PySpark. And we had the session like, I don't know, 1.5 months ago or something, where we went through all of those things. So kind of if you want to investigate and look at the other features, there's a recording out available for that. If you are Power BI developer or DAX developer without any PySpark background, this can be created as an environment. So you could create an environment where these are preloaded automatically. So then you won't even need these 2 lines of code when using your kind of when you want to run DAX statements. But when you have those loaded into your session, you can run both DAX statements, and actually you can also run the XMLA queries against the model. So for example, here, let me try to memorize some other column. There's a freight column in the model. In fact, internet sales table, I have a column called freight, if I remember correctly. Let's look. And this one, we have not loaded. Oh, we have loaded that. That's not good. That's not good. Let's take something else, probably. There is a color attribute in the theme product. Why this is important? It was in the Finnish version. We went to the demo where we show that you can check whether something is loaded into the memory or not. Now, unfortunately, this is also loaded already. I think that when we started querying this one, Fabric has probably done some caching behind the scenes, or it was this my Power BI desktop which I used to query, but it was in the Finnish demo, the Finnish version of the demo, we had this as NA, so it was not loaded into the memory. What we did then is that we executed a query which queried those columns. So they were like evaluated and some number was visible. It was actually this row count, I think. This one row count measure, which we use, is this one reads heavily, scans the table. So it could be this one that actually populated the one in Finnish session. But anyway, you could automate some DAX statements, which then, when executed, would populate this model into the memory. Because in Fabric, you don't control your cluster. You cannot say that shut down my cluster or start up my cluster or reload this data into the memory, because it's just service everywhere. And if you have an important report which you provide an SLA or you promise an SLA to your end users, it could probably make even sense to automate some queries against your model, which would then always populate or keep the result set or the rows in memory. Because in tabular model, the result set itself could be cached, but it's also the rows that are in memory. So kind of when you execute this query and get those rows into the memory, it doesn't matter if the end user does a slightly different filtering on the query, because if the dataset is in memory, it will be much faster. Then, of course, there is no guarantee how long that could be in memory. But as this is a notebook, you can schedule the notebook, or you can have it as an ETL pipeline as a step, because it's just a notebook. You can execute a notebook. So kind of, I would say that there's an opportunities to optimize the kind of model behavior if you have a model which requires or benefits from being in memory structure. Or as said, when you are developing within the team and you have a set of queries you use to validate the model, today there is no good way to save those queries, but you could save them in the notebook, and then they are available in the workspace for everyone to consume. And within the notebook, there is the collaboration functionality that multiple persons can edit the notebook simultaneously. So this one, of course, works with the DAX statements also, because it's not PySpark or other related. It's built on top of the notebook experience. So if and when you have DAX statements to run against your models, it would make sense to run them in a notebook and use it from there. There will be, as said, the whole semantic link and SemPy libraries, which kind of enable loading these result sets to the Spark data frames, visualizing them from there, and then kind of that world is of course on top of this. But now today's session is mainly for people who are not PySpark professionals, but would like to have a place where they could run DAX statements against their models within the kind of common platform in Fabric. Thank you.
Yeah, it seems like a very stack agnostic platform. So even if you're coming in from Dataiku or Databricks,